They say that a person's true character is revealed not in the heat of a fight, but in the quiet moments of a celebration. It was supposed to be a day of cake and laughter. It was supposed to be a day to honor the woman who had been the mother of my wife, the grandmother of my children, the matriarch of a family I had poured my entire life into building. I thought I had been given a gift, a beautiful wife, a comfortable home, and a family that I could call my own. But what they don't tell you is that the greatest gifts can also become the most painful chains. What they don't tell you is that the people you trust the most can be the ones who will break you in front of everyone you know. And they'll do it with a smile on their face. I'm an old man now. Not too old to remember the feeling of a heart cracking, but old enough to know that some cracks can be filled with gold. This is the story of how I learned that the most important thing in this world isn't how much something costs, but how much you are worth to the people who claim to love you. I had spent my retirement money to buy it. Every single cent of a small, carefully saved lump sum that was meant to be my security blanket for my golden years was gone. I remember the day I walked into the jewelry store, my hands a little shaky, my eyes a little watery. I had been saving for so long, not for me, but for her, my mother-in-law, the woman who had never quite looked at me with warmth, but who had at least pretended to tolerate me for the sake of her daughter. I saw a necklace in the display case that shimmered like captured starlight. It wasn't the most expensive piece in the store. I knew that. I couldn't afford the type of jewelry that would make a socialite's eyes widen. But for me, it was everything. It was a symbol of gratitude, of trying to bridge a gap that had always felt like a canyon. I thought that if I could just give her something beautiful, something that came from the deepest part of my soul, maybe, just maybe, she would finally see me as a son. Maybe she would see the man who had worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter, who had never missed a single family dinner, who had stood by their side through thick and thin. The man in the shop wrapped it in a velvet box and then in glittering gold paper. It felt like holding a dream in my hands. The day arrived. A sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind that feels artificial, like a scene from a movie you know will end in tragedy. The house was bustling with family and friends, aunts and uncles, cousins and neighbors. The air was filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of forced laughter. My wife, Sarah, was in her element, flitting around like a social butterfly, making sure everyone's glass was full, ensuring the party was a success. She looked beautiful. But there was a distance in her eyes that morning, a coolness that I had grown accustomed to, but never accepted. She was so focused on the performance of being the perfect daughter, the perfect hostess, that she barely looked at me. It was the kind of distance that made you feel invisible even when you were standing right next to her. But I held the little gold box tight in my pocket, a secret weapon of goodwill. I had a plan to win them over. Finally, the moment came to present the gifts. It was a ritual in their family, the public display of affection, and more importantly, the public display of wealth. Gifts were not just tokens of love. They were status symbols. They were proof of your value. I saw the other presents, a designer handbag, a set of diamond earrings, a luxury vacation voucher. I felt a lump in my throat as the expensive packages were handed to her. Each one met with a theatrical gasp of joy and a hug so tight it looked like the giver was trying to squeeze the validation out of the recipient. Then it was my turn. "For you, Mother," I said, my voice a little too loud, a little too eager. I walked toward her, holding out the gold package with both hands like it was an offering to a queen. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. The room went quiet, all eyes on me. I could see Sarah's eyes narrow slightly from across the room. She knew what I had spent. She knew I had finally broken into that account we never talked about. The mother-in-law, Margaret, took the package with a look of practiced disinterest. She peeled off the gold paper slowly, deliberately, as if she was trying to see through it without actually seeing what was inside. She opened the velvet box. She looked down at the necklace. The room was silent, waiting for the expected gasp of appreciation. She looked at the delicate chain, the modest gem, and her face went completely blank. She didn't smile. She just stared. Then she lifted her gaze to meet mine. "That's it," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension that was as sharp as a knife. I felt my heart stop. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain that it was all I could afford, that it meant so much to me, but the words were stuck in my throat. She didn't wait for me to recover. With a flick of her wrist, she opened her fingers and let the velvet box fall to the floor. It hit the polished tiles with a small, pathetic thud. The necklace tumbled out, lying on the floor like a piece of trash. A ripple of shocked laughter spread through the room. It was the kind of nervous laughter people use to mask discomfort, but it was directed at me. It was the sound of my humiliation being broadcast to everyone I knew. "Oh, Frank," Margaret said, shaking her head with a theatrical sigh. "I suppose it's the thought that counts, isn't it? It's just, well, it's a bit modest." She didn't pick it up. She just stepped over it, dismissing it entirely, and then the final blow came. My wife, my partner, the woman I had built a life with for 15 years, walked over. She didn't look at me with sympathy. She didn't pick up the necklace. She looked at it, then looked at the smug faces of her mother and the guests, and she laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a laugh of complete agreement. "Honey," she said, her voice light and cruel, "you really should have tried harder." She said it to the room, not to me. "It's worthless." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "It's worthless." She was talking about the necklace, but I knew in that moment that she was talking about me. I felt a strange calm descend over me. It was the calm that comes right before a storm. The laughter was still ringing in my ears, the humiliating smiles still burning on my face. I looked at my mother-in-law, standing there like a queen who had just banished a jester. I looked at my wife, who had just sided with the executioner. I looked at the necklace on the floor, a symbol of my sacrifice, my love, now trampled on. The anger was there, of course, but it was buried deep beneath a growing, solid layer of ice. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I was done fighting for their approval. I was done trying to be someone they would respect. I was done living a lie. I bent down slowly, my old joints creaking, and I picked up the necklace. I tucked it safely back into the velvet box. I put it in my pocket. The whole room was watching me, waiting for me to cry, to yell, to beg for forgiveness. But I didn't do any of those things. I stood up straight. I smoothed down my shirt. I walked over to the table where the cake was sitting untouched. I picked up the knife, but not to cut it. I turned to face the room. The laughter died down, replaced by a curious, awkward silence. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I think this is a good time for an announcement." I looked directly at Sarah. I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She wasn't sure what was happening. She thought I was about to grovel. "I have decided," I said, taking a deep breath, letting the words form clearly in my mouth, "to divorce my wife." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The room gasped. Sarah's face went white. Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. "I will be speaking with a lawyer on Monday," I continued calmly. "I think it's best if I leave now." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't look back. I turned and walked out the door. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Sarah's shrill voice screaming my name, the shocked murmurs of the guests, Margaret's furious sputtering. But I didn't stop. I got in my car, and I drove away, leaving the sounds of their celebration, their cruelty, and my old life behind me. The drive home was surreal. The world outside my car window looked the same trees, the same houses, the same sky, but everything inside me was different. I had just detonated a bomb in the center of my life. I felt a rush of panic followed by a wave of relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I went to my house and packed a bag. It was my house, but it had never really felt like a home. It was just a building where I lived. I put my clothes in a suitcase, took the necklace from my pocket and looked at it. It wasn't worthless. It was the most valuable thing I had ever owned. It was the thing that had finally set me free. I didn't know where I was going to go. My own daughter, my child from a previous marriage, lived in another state. I could go to her. I could rebuild. But I was too tired to drive. I just sat in my dark living room holding the necklace, and I waited for the world to start spinning again. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there replaying the moment in my head, the sound of the necklace hitting the floor. I felt a cold, hard core forming inside me, a fortress of determination. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. I had spent my whole life being quiet, being agreeable, being a pushover. That was over. Just as I was starting to drift off, the sun beginning to peek through the curtains, I heard it. A knock at the door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, not the aggressive, demanding pounding I expected from Sarah or her mother. It was almost apologetic. I was exhausted, but something made me get up and walk to the door. I opened it, ready to face the firing squad, but I wasn't facing the firing squad. Standing on my doorstep was a man I hadn't seen in a long time. He was older than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, his face etched with deep lines of worry. It was Sarah's father, my father-in-law, Richard. He was a quiet man, always overshadowed by the dominating presence of his wife. I had always felt a kind of unspoken kinship with him. We were both men who had learned to keep our mouths shut to keep the peace. But today, he looked different. He looked broken. "Frank," he said, his voice trembling. Please don't do this." I was shocked. "Richard, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice weary. I stepped aside and let him in. He shuffled into the living room, looking around like a lost child. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, wringing his hands. "Please, Frank," he said again, his voice cracking. "Please don't divorce her. She's a good woman. She's been influenced. Her mother is not a good person. She's poisoned her mind. Please don't leave her. She's all I have." I saw tears welling up in his eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. This man who had always been so passive, so invisible, was standing in front of me, begging me not to abandon his daughter. For a moment I felt a wave of pity for him. He was a victim in all of this too. But then I remembered Sarah's face. I remembered her laughing, calling my gift worthless. I remembered the years of quiet disrespect. "Richard," I said, my voice firm, "she doesn't care about me. This isn't about her mother. This is about her. She stood there and let them humiliate me. She laughed at me." He reached out and grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. His tears were flowing freely now. "Please, Frank, she's outside." "She's standing outside. She's too ashamed to knock. She's so ashamed. Please, just give her a chance. Please." I was stunned. I looked past him out the window. There on the sidewalk, I saw Sarah. She was standing alone, her head hung low, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of my wife again, the girl I had fallen in love with, the woman I had promised to love forever. Something inside me softened. I sighed, a long, heavy sigh. "All right," I said. "Fine, bring her in." Richard hurried to the door. He called out to her, and she slowly shuffled up the path. She came into the house, her face blotchy and red. She wouldn't look at me. She just stood there sobbing. She apologized. She said she didn't mean it. She said it was all her mother's fault. She said she loved me. And I, the fool, the man who had been so starved for affection for so long, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I forgave her. I held her, and she cried in my arms. I felt like I was in a movie. I felt the tension of the previous days start to melt away. We went back to the house. We started to rebuild. We were a team again. The next few weeks were strange. Sarah was being nicer to me than she had been in years. She was attentive and kind. She didn't mention her mother's name, and I didn't ask. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could finally move on. I thought that the humiliation at the party, the public divorce announcement, had been a wake-up call. I thought we were starting over. I was wrong. So terribly, tragically wrong. 1 month later, I received the news. Richard, my father-in-law, had passed away. It was a heart attack. They said he had been under a lot of stress lately. I felt a deep pang of sadness. He was a good man, a man caught in a cage made of his own silence and his wife's greed. I felt guilty. I had seen him on the day Sarah apologized. He had been so fragile, so broken. I wondered if the stress of his daughter's marriage almost ending had been too much for him. I felt a heavy weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. The funeral was a somber affair. The whole family was there, 100 people or more, all dressed in black. There were so many tears, so many whispers. The air was thick with grief, or at least the performance of it. I was standing near the back of the hall trying to be invisible. I just wanted to pay my respects and leave. As the service was winding down, I saw my wife and her mother huddled in a corner near the entrance to the private family room. They were whispering intensely. Something about the way they were standing, the furtive glances they were throwing around, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts were screaming at me. I knew I had to get closer. I couldn't just walk over to them. They would see me. I had to be stealthy. I pretended to need some air. I slowly made my way toward the hallway near the private room, acting as casually as possible. I stopped just outside the door, hidden by a large potted plant. Their voices were low, but in the quiet hall, I could hear every word. I heard my wife's voice, and it was like a knife twisting in my gut. All the kindness, all the apologies, all the warmth of the past month had vanished. This was the real Sarah. "We can't afford to let him leave now, Mother," she was hissing. "He's the only one with any money left. We need to secure the house and the retirement fund. We have to make sure we get everything." Margaret's voice was even colder, even more calculating. "The will is handled," she said. "Everything is ours, but we have to ensure Frank doesn't try to take it. The divorce was a disaster. We can't let him get any ideas. We need a plan." My blood ran cold. This wasn't grief. This was a business meeting, a conference call about how to loot my life. Then Sarah said something that made me feel physically sick. "Everyone thinks the stress was from the party," she said. "But we can use this. We can say he caused this. We can say he was abusive, that he used to beat me, that he drove Dad to his death." Margaret chuckled, a dry, sinister sound. "A grieving widow," she said, "a woman who was beaten down by a tyrant. No one will question a weeping daughter. The sympathy alone will be enough to make sure he gets nothing. We'll ruin him in court." I felt the world spin. The betrayal wasn't just a knife in the back. It was a knife in the soul. These two women who had just been crying crocodile tears over a dead man were planning to frame me for his death and for abuse. They were going to destroy my reputation and take everything I had. I saw it all so clearly now. The tears, the forgiveness, the reconciliation. It was all a trap. It was all to make sure I was close enough to them when the time came to strike. They were about to walk out in front of 100 grieving people and tell a lie so monstrous it would destroy me forever. I knew I had to act. But I didn't have a plan. I was just a man, old and heartbroken, about to be eaten alive by two vipers. I fumbled in my pocket, my hands shaking. I felt my phone. I thought about the past few weeks. I thought about the little recording app I used to use to dictate notes to myself. In a moment of pure instinctual desperation, I had recorded the conversation I had with Richard that day in my living room. I had recorded his pleas, his confession about his wife's greed and her affairs. I had recorded Sarah's name being mentioned, the whole sordid history of manipulation that he had tried to confess to me. I had recorded it out of habit. Or maybe some part of me was wise enough to know I would need it. I had it. I had their own father and husband's voice telling the truth. The truth about Margaret's affairs, about her greed, about her poisoning his daughter. It wasn't just a recording of him crying. It was a recording of him telling me that his wife was a greedy woman who had affairs with many men, even in her old age. It was a recording of him telling me that Margaret was the problem, that she was the one who wanted the money, who wanted everything from Sarah. I could hear the women's heels clicking on the floor. They were about to come out. They were about to put their plan into action. I saw a small, lonely podium set up for the eulogies. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I knew I had just a few seconds. They stepped out of the room, their faces pale and streaked with fresh tears. They were playing the part perfectly. Sarah, the grieving daughter, walked up to the podium and the room fell silent. Her mother stood beside her, nodding supportively, playing the grieving widow. Sarah began to speak, her voice trembling with grief. "My father, my wonderful father. He suffered so much," she began. "He was so heartbroken. He couldn't bear to see what was happening to his family. She paused, taking a dramatic breath. He told me. He told me before he died. He couldn't live in fear anymore. He couldn't stand by and watch his daughter be mistreated. The lies were so sweet, so poisonous, dripping from her lips like honey-coated venom. I saw the crowd leaning in, their faces full of sympathy for her, suspicion for me. "My husband," she said, pointing a shaking finger at me, "has been a monster. He tortured my father with his cruelty. He beat me, he broke me. And my father, he died of a broken heart because of him." The room gasped. They were going to do it. They were going to blame me for a man's death. They were going to make me the villain. I couldn't let it happen. I stepped forward out of the shadow of the potted plant. I walked toward the podium. The crowd turned to look at me. Sarah saw me, and her eyes widened in a flash of fear before she masked it with a mask of righteous anger. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Get away from me, you monster." I didn't say a word. I walked to the podium. I looked at her, my wife, the woman I had forgiven, and I felt nothing. Just a cold, solid resolve. Then I saw the microphone. I knew what I had to do. I reached out and gently, but firmly, pushed Sarah aside. She stumbled, her mother rushing to catch her. "You see," Margaret yelled to the crowd. "He's violent." He pushed her. "This is what we've been dealing with." I didn't listen to her. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I saw my finger, steady and sure. I pressed the play button. For a moment, there was only silence. The crowd was stunned, frozen in place. They didn't know what was happening. Then the phone speaker crackled, and Richard's voice filled the room. It was shaky, desperate, broken. "Please, Frank, please don't do this. She's a good woman. But her mother is not a good person. She's poisoned her mind." The crowd leaned in, their whispers dying instantly. The recording played on. The audio was clear, capturing every agonizing word. "Please don't leave her. She's all I have." Then Richard's voice got clearer, more desperate. My wife is a greedy woman. She has had affairs with many men. She is only after the money. She is trying to get everything from my daughter. She is poisoning Sarah." The effect was immediate. It was like a bomb had gone off in the room. There was a collective, strangled gasp from the congregation. People were looking at Margaret, not with sympathy but with shock and disgust. Margaret's face went from pale to white to a deep mottled red. Sarah was frozen, her hand still reaching out toward me, her jaw hanging open. You recorded him?" she whispered, her voice full of horror. "You trapped my father?" I held my phone up for the whole room to see. "I didn't trap him," I said, my voice calm and steady for the first time in months. He came to me. He came to me because he knew the truth. He knew his wife was a greedy woman and that she was using his daughter to get money. He knew the truth, and he wanted me to know it before he died. He was so ashamed. He was begging me not to leave his daughter, but he was also telling me the truth about you." I looked at Sarah, my wife. It was never about love, was it? It was always about the money, the house, the life insurance. It was all a game, and you were just playing your part. The crowd was in chaos. People were talking over each other. The religious figure who had been conducting the service was looking at Margaret with undisguised contempt. Margaret tried to speak, to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. She was caught. The voice of her dead husband, the man she had just been eulogizing as a saint, had just exposed her as a lying, cheating, greedy fraud. Sarah was crying now, but they were real tears of desperation this time. "It's not true!" she screamed. "He's lying. That's a fake. He manipulated him. My father was sick. He didn't know what he was saying." But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it had grown into a full tree of truth. The crowd didn't need to believe everything Richard said. They had seen the performance of Sarah and Margaret. They had seen their cold, calculated act of cruelty a month ago. They had seen the public humiliation of the gift. And now they were hearing the dead man's voice telling them it was all a lie. I turned to the crowd. "I have no ill will toward any of you," I said. "I loved my wife. I loved my family. But I will not be made a villain to cover up their greed. I am not a monster. I am just a man who was finally shown the truth. And the truth is that I am a better man than either of them. I put my phone back in my pocket. I looked at Sarah one last time. Your father came to me begging me to save you, I said. And I tried. I tried to give you a second chance. But you were never looking for a second chance, Sarah. You were just looking for another way to take everything from me. I have nothing more to give you. And then I did the only thing I could do. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the funeral hall. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me, Sarah screaming, Margaret howling in rage. But I didn't look back. I walked out into the sunshine, and I kept walking. I had survived. I had exposed the truth. And in the end, I had won. I had walked out of there with my head held high, a free man. It took losing everything to find myself. And in that moment, standing in the sun, I realized that I hadn't lost anything at all. I had just thrown away the chains.